For the last several weeks, we've been learning Tomer Devorah, and this week we're up to chapter 3 in this foundational Kabbalistic text. Again, written by Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who lived in the 16th century in Sfat and sought to systematize Kabbalah, these different strands of mystical teachings of Judaism which were floating around in his life, and he sought to bring it all together into one complete system. So we begin chapter 3, and by the way, if you're just beginning with us, that's all right. Chapter 1 and 2 is available on our YouTube channel. These are recorded, and I'm so happy at the amount of listens that each one is receiving. It shows me that people actually enjoy these and are forwarding them on. Chapter 3 is what we're going to focus on this morning. If you have the book, we're on page 42. And last week we studied the divine attribute of humility and wisdom. And this week we're going to just focus on wisdom. He begins, how should a person accustom himself or herself with the attribute of wisdom? Or rather, I would say it a little bit differently. How does one act wise in the world? Although it is hidden and exceedingly exalted, Chokhmah is spread out over all that exists. He posits that everything in the world possesses some quality of wisdom. And it's hard to imagine, with the amount of people that I've met, that every person possesses wisdom. But Rabbi Cordovero apparently is hanging out with a much smarter crowd in Sfat, but he believes that every single person, every single being, as he'll go on to say later in the chapter, possesses some degree of wisdom. And now, a wise person would ask, what does he mean by wisdom? And I think today in 2019, it's more complicated to answer that question than it was in the 16th century. Meaning to say, today, we often confuse wisdom with Google. The ability to type in a question and receive an answer from a computer is not wisdom. That is not what Rabbi Cordovero is admiring as a divine quality. The decision-making process that Rabbi Cordovero is speaking about carries with it a certain degree of intentionality, a certain degree of understanding the repercussions of such decision-making. That whole process that unfolds, that's wisdom. As it says regarding wisdom, how great are your works, God? You have made them all with chokhmah, which is a quote from Tehillim, Psalms. Similarly, a person's chokhmah should be found in everything, and he or she should teach in order to benefit other people. Meaning to say, somebody who possesses wisdom doesn't keep it for themselves. They teach other people how to make decisions just like they do. Each and every one according to their capacity. He or she should influence others with chokhmah to the best of their ability, letting no factor at all distract them. He turns now to the supernal attribute of chokhmah. There are two aspects. The higher aspect, meaning the higher version of wisdom that we're capable of, which faces kater, or faces humility, or faces above on the sfirot towards God. It receives from above, meaning someone who is wise is also someone who learns. Someone who is wise is also an active learner. So the smartest people that I know often begin conversation with me by asking me what it is that I'm reading. Basically, smart people, wise decision makers, are always trying to learn more. And as we'll see later on, they're always trying to challenge their own way of thinking. The second and lower aspect of wisdom faces downwards, overseeing the other sfirot, the other attributes, which extends its chokhmah. So a person should have two aspects. The first aspect should be his or her contemplation in solitude with his or her creator in order to increase and perfect chokhmah, wisdom. The second should be to teach others the chokhmah that the Holy One has bestowed upon them. And just as chokhmah bestows to each sphira, to each, chokhmah affects every other attribute according to its measure need, so too one should bestow to each person according to the measure his or her intellect can bear and to what is proper to his or her needs. There are lessons that I teach the religious school kids, the students, that I don't teach in this room, and there are lessons that I teach in this room that I don't teach in the religious school. Because the capacity to learn is different. The level of wisdom is different and should be nurtured different. Now, this made me think, you say, well, what have you been reading lately, right? So last week I talked a little bit about Max Nordau. This week I was reading an essay by Echad Ha'am, back to the Echad Ha'am book of essays. And in here he writes an essay called The Transvaluation of Values. I love these European Enlightenment thinkers. The titles alone are so pretentious. You have to figure out what the English actually means, okay? So the transvaluation of values. Okay, so in it, what is the value that he's challenging about the Jewish people? What makes me think of wisdom, the upper and the lower natures of wisdom? I'm going to read directly from the essay. The whole life of the Jews from the time of the prophets to the present day has been, in the opinion of those who propound this new gospel, one long mistake, and it demands immediate rectification. During all these centuries, Judaism has exalted the abstract spiritual ideal above the real physical force. It has exalted the book over the sword, over the world. By this means, it has destroyed in the Jews the striving after individual mastery. It has subordinated the reality of life to its shadow. It has made the Jew a sort of appendage to an abstract moral law. Now, that alone is enough, it should be enough to blow you away. What is Echad Ha'am talking about? Echad Ha'am is saying that in the rabbinic tradition, which begins with the Mishnah, let's say in roughly 0, and extends out to this moment at Adat Shalom today, as it was supposed to, as it was intended, to this bima in West LA. The rabbis construct this system where we, in fact, hold up the abstract idea of Torah above all else. And what Echad Ha'am goes on to say is that that wasn't how biblical civilization worked for Judaism. Why did we take that step? And I'm not going to stand here and explain to you whether or not we should have taken the step or we shouldn't have taken the step. I mean, I do walk the earth with the title of rabbi, and at the same time am an ardent Zionist, so I believe very much what it is that he's writing about. But I want to point out that the important issue is that he woke up and he said, is this system the correct reflection of the way Judaism was supposed to be? It takes wisdom to live in a world and look at that world from the outside and say, perhaps this isn't what was intended. Perhaps all of the leaders and the teachers and the speakers that I have listened to my entire life are purporting something different than what should be. And it only takes, dozens, when you think about it, dozens of people who wake up and question their reality that then form that initial generation of Zionist thinkers that changes the face of the world, that changes the future of Jewish reality, that changes the future of our existence by asking very simple questions about the world in which they live. Questions that other people were not asking before them. Similar to the founding of this country, right? Similar to the founding of this country. Those people who happened to be standing in that First Continental Congress, they asked questions that their predecessors and previous generations had not asked. And all stories of independence like this involve a certain generation, a certain group of people coming together to ask these kinds of questions. And I would say that is not looking downward at the reality of the world and teaching what you've received. It's looking upward and questioning the world around you in which you exist. And what Rabbi Cordovero posits is that wisdom demands that of us. Wisdom demands an individual responsibility to look at the world and be in conversation with God and ask, is this the way the world was supposed to be? And if it's not the way the world was supposed to be, then what do I do about it? I'm going to skip now a few pages to page 45, and I'm going to introduce a concept here that's just 2 sentences long in this paragraph. In addition, Chokhmah is the father of all existence. And usually I try to make the language sound egalitarian, so I say his or her or them or whatnot. But here I'm not going to clean it up because it's going to continue with us through the rest of the book. And mystical teaching, in the Zohar especially, includes a lot of sexuality and a lot of gender, and those two ideas are not tied together. Meaning to say, God is sometimes masculine, God is sometimes feminine, and these two different ideas are not tied to somebody's gender, right? So a man or a rabbi can portray masculine qualities and feminine qualities, and so for the purposes of understanding the system of Kabbalah, I want to keep this the way that it is. So Chokhmah, meaning wisdom, is the father of existence, and next week we're going to discuss the mother of existence, which is Bina, or understanding, right? So we understand how this system begins to develop. So there is, through the union of wisdom and understanding, produces the rest of the attributes themselves. They all possess a certain degree of wisdom and understanding. And we turn the page now to the next page. And we go to the last paragraph of the chapter on page 47. This is the general principle. Having pity on all existence, not to ruin them, is contingent on Chokhmah. I wouldn't go as far to say that he is an environmentalist, but I would say that the idea that we live in a world filled with wonder and beauty and nature and the world itself is something to be in awe of. The idea that somebody who is wise could think we need these resources for the system to work. There has to be a degree of compassion, I'll use the word instead of pity, compassion on all. Even if a person is so wise that they see what's needed, we can't do this endlessly. There has to be a check on wisdom itself. Just because somebody has the best idea in the room doesn't mean a community or a system is ready for that idea. There has to be a degree of compassion in the person, except when elevating them to a higher level, from plant to animal, from animal to human. This is very progressive thinking, I want to point out, for the 16th century, meaning to say, this is Rabbi Cordovero, this is in no way a liberal hippy-dippy rabbi who is talking about ideas like nature and, evolution long before Darwin comes along, long before those scientific thinkers. He's already pointing out that there's a progression of divine attribute, and he's not talking about how we came to exist. He's talking about divine attributes, but nonetheless, he is laying out a system. From plant to animal, from animal to human, then it is permissible to uproot a plant or to slaughter a live animal, causing damage in order to bring merit. And in this last paragraph is the warning for his entire book. Meaning to say, one could just read chapter 2 and say, the world is better off when we use, name the natural resource that is dangerous for us at this point, that we use too much of it, coal, but whatever it might be. We could be better off. Our economy could function better. And by the way, what I'm saying is not nefarious. Also, we could benefit people who are less fortunate than us in worlds that need it. There are arguments to be made, rational arguments, for why we should use this resource more and more and more. And what he's saying is that ultimately, that wisdom has to be put in check by compassion. Somebody has to stand up and say, if we do this in totality, what are we wrecking? What are we destroying? And that person who says, let's not destroy anything, let's not touch anything, let's not use any resources that the world has provided, that person has to be put in check by wisdom. Compassion alone cannot rule the world. Wisdom alone cannot rule the world. We have to live in a world that's balanced. And I think the argument is through the Sfirot, through this system that Rabbi Cordovero is teaching in this small book, Tomer Devorah, in this succinct teaching, we will live our lives in greater balance. Shabbat Shalom.